Arcane's characters are grey, meaning they're not just good or evil, but that doesn't make them less villainous or heroic. It makes them human. The category of hero and villain is far too simplistic to describe them, yet it is undeniable how they lean on one category or the other. That complexity is what made me make more videos about Arcane, to better understand why I love these characters, and although I have a preference for the villains, the heroes also deserve the spotlight. To understand Jayce and Silco, we need to take a look at what our heroes did wrong. Because I decided to include more characters in this one, I'll divide them into groups. First comes Vi, the obvious protagonist, then come secondary characters who are as important as Vi to advance the story, in my opinion.
Oh, Powder!
Vi's arc is mainly about growing out of the mentality that everyone on Piltover is her foe. On the other hand, her arc is also marked by having to deal with the consequences of her mistakes. Vi's origins is what propels these issues, Jayce and Caitlyn being its personifications. Caitlyn's character is similar to hers, since they'll discover a friend and a lover in each other. It's a kind of forbidden love between a rebel and a high-status gal. By the look of things, I hope they did go down the tragic queer couple path. Both points of character growth collide eventually when her past mistakes make it hard for Vi to rebuild her life after being released when she chooses to open her mind or not. Let's focus on the first conflict, which is the scar that Piltover left on Vi. Her parents were murdered by Piltover's forces, and their influence made it so that Vander, Milo, and Claggor died as well. If Piltover had taken better care of the citizens of the Undercity, the struggle for power between Vander and Silco could have been different, at least to the point that it wasn't lethal. Not all is bad, because with her parents' death came a new family. Although Vander took on the burden of being a father to 4 orphans, Vi still has increased responsibilities as an older sister. She loves Powder, but Vi is also a child who doesn't know better. As a leader of their little band, Vi pushes everyone to their limits, especially Powder. She puts her little sister in trouble many times, pushing her to run and jump when she could very well die from a fall or be caught and killed. Vi has no notion of how fragile Powder truly is, encouraging her because she believes in her. This is where I think Vander did a poor job at parenting. Yes, I'm judging his parental skills. Yes, we see him lecture Vi about all these things, but he's not that much present in their lives. Vander is busy with the bar and running the Undercity while juggling Silco and Piltover to keep the peace. He's arguably a good guy, but he certainly might have needed more help than he may have cared to admit. The children also grew up in a world where they had to fight for scraps, and Vi grew to embrace that mentality. Vander was trying to change the Undercity for the better, but wouldn't it have been wiser to start with his own kids? This is a flaw that later marked the deaths of Claggor and Milo, and the fates of Powder and Vi. I don't think the tragedy of episode 3 is 100% attributed to anyone, but as their adoptive father, I think he had more responsibility. Although exposed from the beginning, episode 3 accentuates the flaws of all the supposed heroes, since we get the consequences of their actions. Vander's weak spots are making the Undercity better and his children, which I think conflict a bit. He's willing to dedicate his life to making the city he lives in better, but he's also kind of neglecting his children because he wants to fight for what he believes in. He was even the one who led Vi's and Powder's parents and many others to their deaths. Struck with guilt, he adopts them. After the failed uprising for peace, he's willing to submit to more powerful people, and for this, he's captured by Silco. Meanwhile, due to Vi's incentive to be like the older children and impress her older sister, Powder launches an attack on her own to help Vi and Vander. Of course, we know this ends in Vander's supposed death, Milo's and Clagger's demise too. A new scar is formed in the hearts of the sisters because of Vander's neglect and Vi's pushy attitude towards her sister. To be fair, Vi had a burden that no child should ever bear. Just because she's the older sister doesn't mean she has an increased responsibility to be a parent figure. Maybe she felt this burden as a leader of their little band, and because their parents died, from their own flesh and blood, only the two of them were left. This is why I must insist that Vander neglected the children to an extent. It wasn't Vi's responsibility to be more than an older sister. It wasn't Powder's responsibility to be like the older sister. It was Vander's responsibility to look after them. I suppose he was doing his best, but sometimes that isn't enough. The second point of possible growth in her arc stemmed from Vi's origin story. She grew up without her parents because of Piltover. She was imprisoned in Piltover without reasonable charges. Piltover has a deal with Silco that once was with Vander. Silco used Jayce against her while using the Undercity with Piltover's blessing. Despite being a flaw, her blind rage against Piltover and its people is justified, especially for figures of authority.
You enforcers are all the same.
The irony of a topsider giving her the freedom she well deserves is beautiful. Although Caitlyn also has her intentions by releasing her, both of them try to broaden their horizons for their common goal, to investigate the criminal activity that may be connected to Silco. In the beginning, they distrust each other since both have been exposed to similar prejudice throughout their whole lives.
In what mad world would I trust someone like you?
This is one of the most beautiful aspects about Vi's arc, and dare I say, the whole show. To see Caitlyn and Vi love and care for each other in ways we were not expected to see them. In the process of discovering who was working for Silco, wreaking havoc, Caitlyn starts to empathize more with Vi when she realizes her sister is behind the attacks. Despite their different views of the world, they manage to work together quite smoothly as both realize chaos can come from Piltover and its underbelly. They are not so different after all. They both seek what's best for their cities and their loved ones. Their inability to come together at the end, like the happy couple they should be, is only because of Vi's unresolved issues from the past. Caitlyn is Vi's bright future, and Jayce is her haunting past. With the sisters' unresolved trauma comes an inability to move forward. Maybe remnants of her childhood propel her to hate her sister, revoking any positive growth she might have found in Caitlyn. Both sisters are stuck in a past they can't quite escape from until, like in the intro, they face each other. That's why I think Arcane will end in a tragedy. In the new season, we'll hopefully see Vi and Caitlyn working together to resolve all the problems that Jayce created. faced with the reality that they'll never quite be the same. And that is Vi's tragic arc. The limit to what we should be able to do with science is a topic spoken about even today. One of the first sci-fi novels explores this as well, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, in Dr. Frankenstein's Ark and His Monster. It is also something discussed in shows like Love, Death and Robots and Westworld. It has become a common element in sci-fi stories, especially those that approach undiscovered scientific inventions such as teleportation, sentient AI, or time traveling, for example. The themes in sci-fi often make us reflect on these same topics. The theme at hand explores how far should we advance technology, which is a relevant topic to discuss nowadays considering space exploration, AI, climate change, extinction, and war. And the creators of Arcane managed to explore this theme in two different POVs, on a personal level in Viktor and on a global level in Jayce. Although both Jayce and Viktor start at the same point of characterization, they choose different paths due to their personal experience with Hextech's success. They're both brilliant young men studying at Piltover University, founded by Heimerdinger. Starting under the wing of great scientists, they allow their minds to invent something far greater than they would have guessed. Much like nuclear energy, which is an obvious parallel to me, Hextech can be used to help and destroy people. There is no innovation without a price, for the greed of people knows no bounds. Jayce created Hextech based on an event in his life that inspired him to save others like once he was saved. Viktor didn't seem to have such a strong motivation as Jayce, though he seemed to show his ambition to break through Heimerdinger's old rules on the limits of science. So he wished to revolutionize the way people saw science and magic. When they have a breakthrough, not long after, they figure out the consequences of their actions. Jinx, like many others, will harness the power of Hextech for their own gains, taking lives in the process and bringing about destruction to Piltover. Jayce's arc focuses on the impact of Hextech in the world in a political, economical context that stems from a power struggle for technology. The global level I mentioned impacts the whole world, the way people travel and fight each other. It affects everyone.
There are those who covet your power over the wealth the Hex Gates afford, and would take any opportunity to seize it from you.
Due to his sudden illness, Viktor's arc analyzes the consequences of greed on a personal level. After so much hard work in his life, he's ill, causing frustration, obviously. He invented something wonderful and now won't be able to enjoy the spoils of war. The more isolated he gets, even from Jayce, Viktor spends more time near Hextech, leading him to the accidental discovery of another use of Hextech. The consequences of his actions mostly affect him and those around him, posing the question of what he's willing to do to recover his healthy body. Although for Season 1 it might be on a personal level, I think that Season 2 will take his miraculous healing seriously, having a bigger effect on the world, especially the Undercity because of his ties to Singed.
Rio will live.
You did this?
I thought you understood. The mutation must survive. I understand now.
Therefore, Jayce has the POV of what the world can do for and with Hextech. And Viktor's POV is one of how it can consume a person to the core. The irony is that most characters who are affected by the limits of what we can do with science are almost always anti-heroes or villains. But Jayce and Viktor are considered heroes in the world, revolutionizers in their own field. Their genius and innocent goodness are traits often found in heroes, but their selfishness, arrogance, and greed are found in villains. There is no denying that Hextech revolutionized transportation, but at what cost? Many other inventions will branch out to do more harm than the transportation does good. Although they had good intentions, their creation can do a lot more than what they intended it to do.
You want us to build weapons? Absolutely not. That is not why we invented Hextech.
While Jayce begins to understand the consequences of his actions have a negative ripple in the world, Viktor immerses himself in the bad that might come with it. Jayce sees it destroying the world he eagerly wished to make better. Viktor destroys himself to make himself better. In the process, we are obligated to ask how much is truly left from Viktor. They are both going to lose a lot, although their consciousness of the issues might determine if they can redeem themselves and correct their mistakes.
Oh. Are you all right, lad?
For wanting what's best for society, they were expelled from where they could make a difference. They forge a path of their own to bring prosperity to the ones around them. These are the ultimate good guys in this world, in my opinion. Both have distanced themselves willingly or forcefully from the people who they've always been around to better themselves, those around them, and the world. Ekko found a peaceful corner in the Undercity, away from Silco's influence. Evicted from the council, Heimerdinger stumbles upon Ekko, which is perfect since he truly wanted to help the Undercity. I do think their meetup was a bit forced and out of place considering how much sense everything else makes in Arcane, but that's beside the point of this video. In many ways, they're the most hero-like characters because they're more cautious about their methods, keeping in mind the interest of the many instead of the few. They're the opposite of Jayce and Viktor, if you ask me. Since Jayce and Viktor did what they did for many reasons, but among them for self-indulgence. Interestingly enough, their origins are such opposites that it's beautiful that they're working together. Although not much is known about Heimerdinger's past, it's undeniable that he climbed a ladder of privilege by becoming a scientist and helping advance Piltover. He is one of the founders of Piltover, so his status endured for many years. His ultimate downfall would ironically be to hinder the progress of the dangers of mixing magic and science. We get glimpses in his dialogue that he might have seen the destructive power of magic.
Magic?
Yes.
No.
No?
The Arcane is dangerous, Jayce. A force of nature. Science cannot control it.
While Ekko grew up in a similar way to Vi and Jinx, he didn't have to fight as much for working at Benzo's shop. Of course, later on, he did have a hard life that were hinted at like most people in the Undercity. When he meets Heimerdinger, we realize how hard he's fought to have a normal life and provide it to the rest of his people. One day, I believe they might be the ones who make peace between Piltover and the Undercity. Under Heimerdinger's tutelage, Ekko may learn more as a young man like himself should, and Heimerdinger may learn more about the Undercity and how to properly help its people. Just like the villains of Arcane, the heroes have flaws and qualities, helping wreak havoc all the same. They are the focus of the important themes in the show, accentuating their flaws or bettering themselves for the world around them. Their actions are not always heroic, nor they do have good consequences at all times. Vi shunned away Jinx, creating a rift that transformed Powder into a villain. Caitlyn did her best to investigate the crimes inflicted upon Piltover, only to deepen the rift between Vi and Jinx, even if unwillingly. Vander was a bit irresponsible with the children he adopted, even though he wanted to be a father to them. Jayce and Viktor created Hextech intending to make the population's life better. Instead, they ended up discovering destructive techniques to use their creation. Ekko and Heimerdinger both have fought their own at the cost of their own isolation, though not without reward. Bottom line is, they are not perfect. So, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.